Shalom. This is Nizama Shalhamadabar Yesharel on my channel Nizama the Hebrew Mystic Healer. Before I get started, as always, I would like to show some love to my 3D Ken, the 12 tribes of Israel scattered to the four corners of this third-dimensional earth plane of existence. Much love and shalom to you. I would also like to show some love to my cosmic Ken, scattered to the 12 dimensions of this universal egg matrix. Much love and shalom to you as well. And as always, show some appreciation to my viewers, especially those of you who are subscribed. If you're not yet subscribed, please do so now, and don't forget to hit the notification bell. Also, if you like this video, don't forget to give it a like. So, I feel like my appearance requires a slight explanation for many of you. Why am I dressed like this? Why am I wearing all black? Why do I have black lipstick on? Why am I rocking the hexagram and the pentagram? Why do I always have my head wrapped? Well, I feel like the head wrap might be better to discuss at a different time, but this video is going to be focusing on the topic of shadow work, of repressed archetypes within the collective consciousness, and also symbols that have been vilified as well. There were once aspects of sacred geometry. So I wanted to cover those primarily. The repressed archetypes and the repressed sacred geometric symbols. And I might actually transition into, how this is reflected in mainstream religion, how this is reflected in the consciousness, the collective consciousness as a whole, and how this is even reflected within like the spiritual communities, like the so-called Hebrew Israelite communities, the so-called, New Age communities, the so-called Starseed communities. So first I want to just say, I feel like I'm going to have to identify shadow work, so I will get to that, but I want to go ahead and touch on the symbols real quick. The hexagram, contrary to a lot of dogmatic popular belief, has nothing to do with Satan, has nothing to do with the demiurge, okay, unless you have it as part of like a seal that's directed at that energy, right? It's not an evil symbol. It has nothing to do with Moloch, nothing like that. What it symbolizes, and I'm not even saying that Moloch is evil. I know that Moloch is vilified in the Hebrew texts. I believe that child sacrifice is evil. But I don't believe that necessarily because child sacrifice is being done to these particular beings or egregores or whatever, that those beings and egregores were necessarily evil. It could have just been the way that those people were trying to reach them. And a lot of people just jump to, blood sacrifice and child sacrifice to get power. And that's just, it is what it is. But I digress. So, going back to the topic in hand. From both the Hebraic perspective and from a more holistic perspective, because this symbol actually goes back to Mu. Believe it or not, goes back to the civilization of Mu. It's also very prevalent in the Indian culture, and it's prevalent in the Jewish and the Hebrew culture. Also makes an appearance more so in the form of a Merkaba in Egypt, but also there as well. So all it represents in a nutshell is the merging of the divine feminine, divine masculine. So the feminine will represent the upside down triangle, the chalice or the womb, and the masculine would represent the phallus, the triangle pointing up, or the penis or the masculine energy. So pointing up to the heavens, being associated with the Heavenly Father, and this one pointing down to the earth, being associated with the earthly mother. So it's a very old, ancient symbol. It represents the totality. It also represents the merging of the higher self and the lower self. And we're going to talk about that later, because that's kind of part of what I want to touch on, how shadow work helps in that process. So that's what this essentially symbolizes. It also symbolizes, so not only does it symbolize the totality of union of our divine selves, as above, so below, but it also symbolizes our Merkaba, or it's a 2D representation of our activated light Merkaba, or our light bodies, or our light vehicles, which are discussed all throughout the Bible as chariots of fire and whirlwind. I'm probably going to have to sneeze, guys. Here, hold on. Sorry, really bad allergies today, guys. Anyway, so I digress. So basically that's what it symbolizes in a nutshell in this 2D form. What does a pentagram symbolize? So this has had a lot more alterations throughout history. But originally, It actually symbolizes a multitude of things. In general, it represents the 5 elements of earth, air, fire, water, and spirit. And so if it's pointed upward with the 1 point, and this one, the way they made it, they didn't make the gaps big enough, so I can't even set it one way or the other. It just kind of goes around between the two. But if it's upright like this, right, this represents like spirit ascending from matter up into the heavens, and it also represents, you know, the 5 elements, but it also represents woman. And this is another aspect I forgot to mention. So the hexagram, even though it does represent the merging of male and female, or the merging of the divine feminine and divine masculine, it also represents more of the masculine, because this is supposed to represent the phallus dropping down here. So that's another added symbol to it. You know, so I just want to throw that out there. Sometimes it's associated with Saturn. This sometimes is associated with Venus, but that's more when you get into like the Greco-Roman culture. But I digress. From the Hebraic culture, or from like the more holistic view, it was the other terminology I gave. So that would be the pentagram, and the reason it's deified even more than this is deified up here, the hexagram, is because it's associated with the female, which is something that the feminine divine is really repressed within the scriptures, which has really been done over a process of time. It didn't happen overnight. But basically, so that's that on that symbol. Now, when you turn it like this and it's inverted, you may see a lot of different cults, or a lot of the left-hand pathers may attribute it to, like, you know, the horned god. But also they understand that it really talks about the descent of spirit into matter. So it represents us coming down here from the high spiritual planes into the material world. But it also represents us diving into our lower nature in order to master it. So a lot of people that are working on the left-hand path, you'll see wearing this, and they're not all like Satanists, but you know, there is that association as well. It's usually considered an evil symbol, but again, going back to my topic I want to talk about today, that, you know, a lot of things have been demonized to basically dissuade us from working with it. So I'll put it like this. The elite have demonized a lot of things and perpetuated them throughout mainstream religions, because if you believe that a cup is poisoned, you're not going to drink out of it. And that means whoever knows the cup isn't poisoned can drink to their fill. So let me give you an example. There is a constellation that is often obviated. It's called Ophiuchus. It's essentially a woman holding a snake. It can be associated sometimes, I'm not saying it always is, but it can be associated with, it for sure represents the dark feminine, or the mother. But it also can represent, you know, Lilith, Medusa, Ishtar, you know, things like that. So that type of energy, that type of more, you know, primordial, like feminine, dark divine energy. Also, the number 13 is associated with the cosmic wound, going back, and that's how you exit the egg, the universal egg. So the cosmic wound, also pointing to the feminine energy, is the womb that we came through to come here. It's the primordial darkness that we came through to come here. And it's, you know, so it's that symbol. And that's why a lot of beings, like, for example, Tiamat, okay, from, you know, the Babylonian and Akkadian, you know, culture, became something evil later on in Villainized, and became demoted to, like, you know, Quiplothic intelligences and stuff, is because, not to say that Quiplothic intelligences that means they've been demoted, but a lot of beings that started out gods became basically called demons later on. So if you look at a lot of the old gods, okay, let's look at Baal. And I'm not really advocating one way or another. I'm not like trying to, you know, bash on Christianity or mainstream religions, and I'm simultaneously not trying to, you know, advocate working with the Qibla, but I just have to kind of bring this out and be real. So a lot of the older gods have become demons because of Christianity. You know, they have become demons because of that. So a lot, and there have been some gods that were associated, like with other pantheons and stuff, that the Catholic Church turned into saints. Brigid, for example, or Bridget, actually started out as a goddess, and because the people of Ireland, and I'm talking about the proto-Irish, I'm not talking about the later conquest of Irish, the original Irish, they worshipped her, as a triple, lunar goddess, and also a goddess, not as much lunar goddess, but more so goddess of the hearth and the home. She was very much associated with fire and childbirth and fertility and things like that. Well, they basically wanted to convert those people, and so they ended up taking her into their pantheon. Well, really, it was the same thing what they did with the Hebrews, during the Roman Empire. They wanted to, get the Hebrews to convert, and so they turned Yeshua, who was actually a prophet and a water magi, into a sacrifice and a deity. But what they did was, and this is very sneaky, they actually got the Hebrews to turn away from the rest of their culture, and they painted the image of Cesare Borgia, who was a Roman, over that image. And the original Yeshua or Yeshua was actually a so-called black man. So anyway, I don't want to go too much into history and things like that, or, in conquest and stuff like that, but you can see how there's a concerted effort to take old gods of other cultures and to invert them and make them demons, or push them and into the abyss. So this really essentially also at a larger scale, represents in a micro scale of us repressing aspects of ourselves into the shadow. So what a lot of these archetypes, why are they being repressed in the shadow? Well, they represent freedom from oppression. They represent the wild side. They represent the free side, the chaos side. They represent the side that doesn't obey. And any polarity in its extreme state can create disharmony. So I'm not saying, that we just ignore our light and gravitate and just dive into our darkness and just swim around it at that level. But what I am saying is that we can't neglect it. So what happened, the reason why we have a lot of these shells, these Qliphothic beings, is because we repress them into the shadow within, and we repress them into the shadow without. So that's really what that represents to me. The abyss is really also representative of the shadow. Not the same realm, but it's a representation. So the archetypes within ourselves that we repress are usually the same archetypes in the external that are repressed by society. Let me give you an example. Let's look at Lilith, okay? Within the Hebrew and Jewish tradition, Lilith is considered evil. She's considered a night demon. She's considered, a succubus. But when you look in some of the older culture, and because Lilith goes back way far, she actually precedes the oral traditions of the Hebrew people, believe it or not. She actually goes way beyond that. Now, Lilith actually was originally a representation of freedom. And when you look at, freedom specifically for the divine feminine, and she's one archetype of that. Now, in her shadow aspect, or her darker side, yes, she could be all those things that she was also written about later. But the point being is she represents the aspect of woman that is free, that is independent, that embraces her dark side, embraces her wild side, the wild woman, basically. So of course that archetype is going to be demonized. Of course that archetype is going to be repressed. And you see the same thing happening like within, Eve is lifted up as a standard and Lilith is demonized. So really, if you want to look at this from a strictly esoteric standpoint, Lilith and Eve are the two halves of the same whole. Eve is the light side and Lilith is the dark side. So, how do you like them apples? Ha, see what I did there? It actually wasn't an apple they ate. This is an allegory for taking in wisdom, for learning divinity, like journeying the difference between good and evil, right and wrong, knowledge and ignorance. That's really what we're doing down here, right? So it's the journey. It represents the journey of that whole process, leading back around to the rise of the Kundalini. And that's really what the serpent, that's really what the serpent represents. I'm going to tie this all the way back to the whole demonization of the serpent. Demonization of the serpent happened because the serpent not only is another feminine energy, but also represents inner wisdom. It represents ascension. It gives the control back to the individual, because essentially we are each responsible for our own ascension. We are each responsible for healing ourselves. We are each responsible for our own growth. That is the truth, and that is the lie that is propagated. That's why in mainstream religions, And even in a lot of New Age religions, it's always propagated that we're supposed to be focusing on the external, that somebody is going to come to save us, whether it's, Jesus or the Most High or Allah or Palladians or whatever the hell it is. We're always discouraged from really going within and ascending from within, doing our own inner work. And even if you look at a lot of these mainstream religions, like other than like Buddhism and Jainism and Hinduism, it's actually frowned upon to meditate. It's considered evil. And they always give some kind of excuse of why. Oh, can leave you open for demons and stuff like that. The truth is they don't want it because it's one of the fastest routes to self-actualization. Because when you go to a still point or a 0 point frequency, you can access the true fullness of your divine nature. It's one of the tools to self-actualization and enlightenment, or breaking your will. Also, another thing that they demonize is astral projection, because they don't want you to know how to navigate the astral realm. Why? Because they dominate a lot of the astral realm right now. They control a lot of it. They do experiments. They use it to manipulate. They do a lot of mental magic and glamour. They don't want you to know how to navigate that. They want you to stay asleep and hypnotized within the astral and within the third dimensional realm. They also don't want you to know how to navigate after death in order to find your own way back home. They just want you to blindly go back into the reincarnation cycle over and over and over and over again. Okay? So that's why the serpent's vilified. It represents, self-awareness. It represents inner wisdom. It represents enlightenment. It represents ascension. It represents the DNA. See, it points that the truth is within us. It points that the way to spiritual liberation is within us, not without. It's within our own DNA. It's within us. We have to put in the work. Nobody can save us. Nobody. Nobody can save us to ourselves. We can't just dump our sins onto some other being and have them process that. So, even when you go into the scriptures, it says obedience is better than sacrifice. It's obedience to the voice and the commandments. What does that mean? It means you're obeying your inner voice, your divine voice, and you're obeying the universal laws. In order to live with harmony, you understand the way the universe works, and you live in harmony, you go with the flow with that. So, the dragon is a representation of the rising of the Kundalini going up the spine and sprouting wings. And you can see this depiction all throughout India. You can see it actually everywhere nowadays, but that's really what that symbolizes. So again, the ascension of consciousness. Now, again, that's why the dragon is often demonized in a lot of these mainstream religions. Now, even within, like, Revelation, for example, I will say, as I always say in my channel, there's no such thing as a good or bad race. There are certain lineages that are regressive, and there's certain lineages that are progressive. And there's certain collectives which have oppressed other collectives, and those collectives know who they are. But there's no such thing as a whole, an entire race being evil. Every being has a choice to make decisions that, lead to their growth or evolution, or their regressive de-evolution, in a nutshell. So I just want to kind of put that out there. Now, there have been dragons that have been very maleficent, toward the evolution process on this earth, and there have been some that have been very beneficial, very benevolent. So the red dragon, just really in a nutshell, in Revelation, represents Esau. It represents the kingdom of Esau, and it's because, the Hebrew Edomites or Esau have oppressed their brother, the Hebrew Israelites. They represent, the red dragon, the bad dragon. I'm not saying all red dragons are bad. I actually had a red dragon incarnation myself, but I'm using this as an example that, that's one part of that. But the other part of that is, again, when you vilify the dragon is associated with cosmic energy. It's associated with creation, destruction. It's associated with the ascension and the evolution of consciousness and the realization of your divine nature. So again, of course, they're going to deify this. They're going to deify the divine feminine, because if they can keep the feminines and masculines at odds with each other, then they're not going to be able to evolve together. And if the feminine is oppressed, it's going to cause an extreme pendulum swing. Same thing why racism is propagated. If you have an oppression of one race, that pendulum swing is going to happen, and the other race is going to be oppressed, and it's just going to keep going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, right? Same thing with, patriarchy, matriarchy, patriarchy, matriarchy, right? So it just keeps this whole pendulum swing, this whole game, this whole duality war, this whole feud going. So we all talk about oneness and all this other stuff, but what leads to oneness? So what leads to oneness is doing shadow work. So all of those beings, externally and internally, I mentioned earlier, that have been repressed into the shadow or pushed down into the abyss, they have to be integrated within us. They have to be integrated and the external as well. So this is where shadow work comes in. What is shadow work? Shadow work essentially is looking at the aspects of ourself that we repress. And this can be for a variety of reasons. It can be due to trauma. It can be due to social conditioning, a feeling of rejection, not feeling like we can be accepted. Or maybe we believe very strongly one thing. And so in order for us to live that paradigm, we have to repress any part of ourselves that doesn't align to that. That's also very common. So when we do shadow work, we're looking at these things and we're integrating them back in, because when we don't integrate them, what happens is it can lead to severe soul fracture and schism, which can actually lead to us having soul fragments that break off. These soul fragments that break off can actually become their own conscious entities. Now, they won't have a soul, but they will sustain themselves by feeding, usually off of you, the consciousness that spawned them, so to speak, through extreme trauma and repression. But basically, they exist within the deep caverns of the shadow, within the unconscious. And when you repress them to a certain level, they can't break away and form their own like entity or their own existence, so to speak, and then haunt you. A lot of times when people experience what they think is demonic activity, it's actually their own shadow aspects that have been externalized from extreme repression. Usually people that try to project out the greatest light have the darkest shadow. That's why it's very common for people that are light workers or people that are on very right-hand path, in right-hand path religions, or just following the right-hand path in general, will have more of a tendency to kind of suffer these types of experiences where they feel attacked and stuff. Now, it's not always the case. There are, external beings. I mean, in a sense, we're all, when we go back to the highest vibrational level, we all go back to one source point, but there are individual beings, there are individual blueprints. So, and there are we do have enemies. So there are beings that will try to work against us, but I feel like it's always good for us to look, okay, is this coming from me or is this coming from someone else? We have to look at that first, honestly. So, like, for example, I have a group called Starseed Shadow Hunters, and I teach basic shadow working techniques in the units. I also have it on Patreon where it's more advanced, so I teach actual guided meditations. But basically, when we work to heal this part of ourselves, we bring these aspects in, and they're not always considered quote unquote negative. A lot of times they're positive aspects that we just repress because they didn't fit into what we would consider our paradigm. So that's kind of what happens. So when we accept them and we unify them back in, they actually have less control of our life. They do not run amok, and they're part of us. So we can't just cut off our arm and toss it away. I mean, we could, but we would be like not operating at our full capacity. Likewise, when we allow soul fragments to just roam free, we're not going to be operating at our full capacity. So I just kind of wanted to put that out there. And it can lead to what I said when I was talking about sludge beings. So I kind of went over how all of these different, sacred geometric symbols, all of these different archetypes and symbols in general sense have been, deified, demonized, villainized, and why. So now I want to turn around and kind of apply this and take this back home, so to speak. If you look at what's going on in a lot of the spiritual communities, you can see this thing is still playing out right now. You still have, the dragons are considered the bad guys based on what it says in the Bible, and also based on what it says in all the spiritual communities of, we have the draconians. So it went from the devil, the dragon, to, we have the draconians are the bad guys. And we have white Cheshire Borgia as Jesus, as that egregore. And we have the Palladians, these white aliens that are, the good guys or the saviors. So it's the same polarity game. It's the same story being told. It's very rudimentary. And we have to really stop this schism and we have to stop retelling this story over and over again, and we have to heal this stuff from within. And as I said before, there's no such thing as a good or bad race. Every being, every race has its potential to be on the evolution spiral or on the descent. that it just is what it is. But we're not going to heal anything. We're not going to get anywhere by perpetuating the same crap. So we have to look at our darkness, people. And for the record, if you haven't done shadow work, if you haven't faced your darkness, more than likely you're not projecting out your true inner light. You're projecting out how you think you are or how you want to be perceived, because you can only find your true inner light by going past the darkness. You can't get to your true inner light if you've never even seen your darkness. So I think that I'm just going to wrap it up at this point. I just kind of wanted to touch on that. I feel like this is really an important topic that gets overlooked a lot. And I just felt it was necessary to touch on. And, you know, I'm not saying, oh, you know, you should, you know, go deal with the quiplash. I'm not saying, oh, you should, you know, like wear a pentagram. I'm not saying that you shouldn't believe in Christianity, or that you shouldn't embrace like your Hebrew heritage, like for the Hebrew Israelites, or that you shouldn't acknowledge yourself as a star seed for the star seeds. I'm just saying, like, you know, we have to really look at things honestly and holistically and look at kind of what's going on and think outside the box and the narrative we've been given within these individual paradigms and these individual belief systems. Because when we piece together all the books, when we look within, when we do our own inner work, we kind of piece everything together holistically, we start to get a much clearer picture of what's going on. We have to understand that a lot of these practices and these belief systems have been used as a tool of oppression, so everything has been inverted. And we have to really look at it honestly for what it is, and that's really the truth. You know, anything that's been in an oppressor's hand and then redistributed, you know, it's up for suspect. So that's why it's important to look at everything holistically, because every single one of these books have been in the hands of an oppressive regime. And it's always important, and these books are still being used to oppress, okay? So it's important for us to, yes, we need to embrace our culture. Yes, we need to deal with our ancestry, but we also need to deal with our shadow. And that's also important in shamanism, by the way. So doing shamanic work is shadow work, because when you do shamanic work, you're not looking for the feel-good, you know, experiences. You're looking to grow, looking to heal, and to help others grow and heal. That's why I don't call myself a light worker. I consider myself containing both equal polarities within, and I feel that I'm actually called to work more on the shadow aspect of shamanism and to help people heal their ancestry, to help people heal their blueprint. Now, it doesn't mean I don't have access to the higher realms. I have access all the way to pre-universal, like origin point and the primordial void. Like, I can access all these high dimensions. But what I've noticed is that I'm being taught, you know, to kind of dive more into the opposite side of things, because as long as we neglect and we don't transmute the shadow collectively and individually, things are not going to change. The consciousness is very fractuated, and we have to just look at it honestly like that. And we're all individual fractulated lenses within the whole, and we should all shine our light individually. But in order to do that, we have to go within and really look at ourselves honestly. Otherwise, whose light are we shining, right? If it's not ours, if we can't look at ourselves honestly, then how are we being authentic, and how is that our true authentic light? So with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. I hope you guys found this video to be enlightening and informative. If you are interested in joining my Starseed Shadow Hunter group, definitely see the drop-down menu. Same thing with Patreon. I do teach shadow work, advanced shadow work techniques. I also teach chakra activation techniques. I teach past life regression techniques, and I have a tier which includes everything. I also teach protection, centering, grounding, meditations. I mean, all types of good stuff on there, guys. And more is on the way. So definitely check that out if you're looking to really grow and push yourself, like internally at your own speed. That's what I like about Patreon, because I give you the tools and you do it yourself. So it's awesome. If you're interested in a retro cosmic akashic record reading, definitely hit me up. I'm going to drop that link down as well. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope that I've clarified some of the misinformation and it kind of brought what has been pushed into the shadow into the light, so to speak. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Like I said in the beginning, if you did, give it a like, and stay tuned until next time. Shalom.